Beautiful. Hi, I'm Kat, the Community Manager for UTS Startups. Welcome to another Entrepreneurial Confessions session with entrepreneurs we respect deeply. Today we have Emily Bobis joining us from Compass IoT. Can we get a round of applause for Emily?
Thanks, guys.
So in these chats, we really love to get to the bottom of what actually happened and what your journey has been as a founder, so that others might be able to follow in your footsteps. Does that sound good?
Sure. I mean, I don't have much of a choice right now, but
You're locked in. Cool. So to kick us off, Emily, in 10 seconds, what is Compass IoT?
Sure. So as I was saying to Kat, we recently just changed this a little bit. So Compass IoT is a road intelligence startup. So we create software that uses real-time connected vehicle data to help transport professionals improve road safety, mobility, and smart cities.
Nice, nailed it. Perfect.
There you go. Lots of practice. Yeah.
And to kind of wind the clock back, what were you doing before you started Compass IoT, and who was Emily at the very start of that Compass IoT journey?
So I think probably some context. So my parents have like very traditional kind of jobs. Like my dad's a high school teacher and he has been like his whole life. And then my mum is a university academic. So I always went into uni with this idea of like, I'm gonna get my bachelor's degree, I'm gonna like maybe do postgrad, and then I'm gonna go and get some graduate roles at uni and like go through that way and get like a corporate job basically. Mm-hmm. And then I did a couple of entrepreneurships in what do you call them? Internships at uni, and they really sucked. Like, I was like, damn, like why do people fight for these things? So I did a couple, had some really bad experiences. And I think I just kind of felt a little bit like sad that a lot of the experiences I had, I didn't feel like I made a really big tangible impact, or I'm like, I've done all this really cool stuff at uni and like I'm still trying to fight for positions and things like that. And it was just like kind of not very fulfilling. I did have a really bad experience in China overseas where it was just not a nice office environment, and I was like, this really sucks. And I just kind of had that moment where I was like, if I had to do this for the rest of my life and just sit at a desk from like 9 to 5 and just do something I really don't like, oh my God, I'm not ever gonna be happy just doing that. So I think that was kind of that epiphany point from when I was like, okay, maybe I should take up this opportunity I've had with Compass, where my co-founder Angus offered it to me, just because like corporate is always going to be there. If it doesn't work, it's fine, at least I tried. But yeah, never had the plan to go into entrepreneurship at all. It was always just like, we're going to go to uni and then we're going to get grad role and then we're going to work at like a big four and yeah, that's it. Hadn't thought past that point, but yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned that your co-founder Angus offered the opportunity to work with Compass IoT to you.
Yeah.
So how did that first start? Like, how did Compass get started, and what were those first few months, and like how did you come up with the idea for Compass and work through those early days?
Yeah, sure. So my co-founder Angus, he previously had another startup called Airbike, and I was one of the first like founding team of Airbike. And after we sold Airbike, which was a bike sharing service, there was a lot of interest from governments around mobility data. And we'd had these contacts through government who were like, do you have anything else? Like, what are you going to work on now? And so Angus was like, well, maybe we should start what is now Compass, and we could focus on this idea of tracking things. And I'd like to say it started originally with cars and we were like super smart, but there was like a really important pivot at the beginning where we actually tracked cows. So don't know how exactly we got there, but the idea was you could track cows and you could get rid of fences, because you could just like shock the cow and like almost create a bounding box so that you don't have to like maintain fences or find where your cows are. And then we actually had a chat with a traffic engineer called Nick, who we now hired. Actually, it's a very nice like little circle. Yeah, that's it. So Nick, you've met Nick in our team. He was actually the one that was like, this is actually super cool and you should be looking at mobility data more and like connected vehicles and like that whole space coming up. And we're like, oh yeah, that's like super cool. But I do have like very distinct memories of sitting at uni with Angus when we first started, and we were like, okay, like what's the name of this startup going to be, and like what's kind of the structure and the aim. And I remember when we bought the ABN, we're like, okay, this is all fine now. We've bought the name of the company, we have an ABN, we've bought like the domain name. And that's like really stuck with me, I think, out of everything that's happened.
That was like
those first moments.
the key moment when it all felt real and like it was actually happening.
Like, oh God, shit, we have an ABN now. Like it's an actual thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in those early days, what was your feeling towards Compass? Did you know that you were on to an awesome thing? Were you just going with the flow and, kind of seeing what was going to happen?
I think looking back, there's no way that we could have known that it would have been as like awesome and cool as what it ended up to be. I mean, that being said, there was a lot of like effort that went into getting it to this point. But like looking back, it was always just like from that background of trying grad roles and internships and having a really bad time to being like, okay, I'll try this. If it doesn't work out, corporate's always going to be there. I can go back. So it was never like the first option or. Yeah, it was just kind of like, let's see how it goes. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, then like, well, whatever, I'll be more employable for working in a startup anyway. Yeah. So I'm lucky that it worked out. I'm very glad that it worked out, but yeah, wasn't ever the expectation.
And listening to you talk, it seems like there were quite a few enabling things at the start. It was, the previous experience that you did have and really, creating networks and connections around you that you could lean on. Was there anything else you think at that very start of the journey that really enabled you guys to build Compass IoT, or any resources in particular that really stood out for you?
Oh, I mean, UTS helped. UTS Startups definitely helped.
Not going for a plug there, but thank you.
But it did, because it gave us an office space and it gave us like a space that we could come in, because before we actually had any money, we would come in like every Saturday, because it was the only day that anyone was free, because I used to like sell shoes during the week between classes, and then like Angus had another job, and then like other people that worked with us all had other jobs. So we would come in on a Saturday from like 10 till 2 and just like work on the business. And I think looking back, just being able to have that central space where we could all come and we could all sit and we could all work, even if it was on a Saturday, was such a valuable piece to kind of have that like that meeting point where we could all come and work together. So even though it is like very much a plug, it's like a very genuine plug for the space.
That actually segues like quite well into the next section, which is that whole idea, like there are good ideas everywhere. And what really makes a difference is people putting in the work to turn those ideas into a reality and into a tangible product or service like you have. And in those early days when you were, selling shoes and everyone was working and trying to, squeeze in time to work on Compass, how did you keep up that momentum and find the time and find the energy to work on Compass around all the other commitments that you had?
The short answer is I have no idea. Looking back, I have no idea how it all worked. But I was telling you earlier before this started that I'm reading a really good book at the moment called Grit by Angela Duckworth, who's like a famous psychologist, I think. And in the book, there's a chapter, like I'm only like 2 chapters in, but there's a chapter called Effort Counts Twice. And she quotes, I think the guy's name is Nietzsche, that famous philosopher. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but that's what we're going to go with. And he's talking about the idea of if you give something mythological status, then it kind of gets you off the hook. You're like, oh, well, I don't need to try because I don't have X, Y, and Z naturally built in. And I think the same thing applies to entrepreneurship in particular, because if we kind of view entrepreneurship as this magical thing that's like gatekept by people who are naturally talented at business, it gives you a reason to not put effort into in the first place. And anyone who's ever like done anything of like large amounts of effort or started a startup or a business knows that it is only through persistent and sustained effort that you make the effortful look effortless. And I think that's super important to have the persistence, and like it's a marathon, not a sprint, is like totally an idiom that rings very true. And that's, I think, what really got us through, is that persistence and the consistency and just like turning up, which is 90% of the battle.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great takeaway, and I think so often things are attributed back to X factor, or this person was just amazing at what they did, but quite often it really is just showing up every day and continuing to work on things that really pays off in the end. So what did that first year look like for you?
It was very scrappy, as it still sometimes is. It was working on Saturdays, not having a lot of money, just like trying to throw stuff at the wall basically and see what stuck. And I think just again, it comes down to that persistence. Like it really did suck at times. And I think often through entrepreneurship, the things that get put into PR and media are like the amazing stories and the VC raises, which they should be celebrated. But they also then don't mention that maybe that founder had like 4 startups beforehand that had also failed. And I think it's really important to talk about the fact that entrepreneurship can be like incredibly hard and lonely and terrifying, but like so worth it.
Yeah.
It's not that having those feelings counteracts the other. Like they're both just as valid, but also both just part of that journey as well. And I think going in realistically is very important. But yeah, the first few years were kind of rough, but like I wouldn't like go back and change anything really.
Beautiful, nice. So we love technology-enabled entrepreneurship here at UTS. And for you, Emily, were there any particular technologies that made Compass IoT possible in terms of how the product that you developed, or also how you reach your customers, which could be quite interesting given your focus?
True. I feel like the biggest one is definitely connected vehicles. So just as like a quick spiel about what connected vehicles are, most vehicles from about 2014 onwards have some kind of connectivity, mainly to the internet. So from about 2019 onwards, that gets a lot more advanced. So it was just like GPS, so latitude and longitude of the vehicle. But now it's like doing some really cool things. Like I think Tesla's a really great example where you can like push and pull data to a car, but also from a car. And then you can have cars that like talk to each other. And so we've taken that to a traffic context because the traffic industry has been and still is in some instances quite manual. So you're relying on like people like standing by the side of the road, like manually counting vehicles, or like the rubber strips that you see across the road, like they've been around since like 1920s. And if you want to survey a large amount of area, or you want to do more complex stuff like road safety analysis and like how are people like swerving and braking and what's the violence of that particular action, you can't just do that manually. Even if you did send a person out, you can't measure that data through that measure. So having connected vehicles, I think, has really just enabled us to get such a breadth of data that was previously just inaccessible. So I think that's probably the main one, really.
Yeah.
Like, connected vehicles.
And then in terms of reaching your customers, like how did you get those first customers for Compass IoT? What was that process?
So a lot of it is outreach. I think a lot of people don't want to talk about the fact that trying to get your first couple of sales is really rough because nobody knows who the hell you are, and they're like, you're like 21, why should we trust you or give you our money? Having the previous connections through Airbike and the government definitely helped, both in terms of having people to chat to sell to, but also having people to chat to be like, what's the process behind this, and like how do we actually go about this if we were to like try and sell you something like this. But I think one thing that Angus does really well is he treats customers like people, and I think that's often forgotten in a sales process, is that it's the relationship building that really matters, and like quite genuinely as well. I think sales sometimes is treated as very transactional, which like it has to be in some respect, but building those relationships with those people is then also what's going to get you referrals to the next person. So like really it's low tech, it's just emails and phone calls and like nothing super fancy.
Yeah, it's
Talking to
interesting. Yeah, we frame so many things around what technology really enabled you, which is so crucial, but easy to forget that the people aspect is super important as well for the journey.
Important. Yep.
Beautiful. So it's been 3 years now since you started Compass IoT. What does Compass IoT look like today?
So we don't work on Saturdays anymore. We've actually like banned working on Saturdays because of those first couple of years. It started with I think about 3 or 4 of us, and now we're at a team of about 11, which is really big.
Nice, that's insane.
Yeah, I think the core is still there, but I think it's a lot more nuanced, and I think we've learned a lot more about how to approach things, and there's a lot more processes involved, and just it's a bit more streamlined. So I think it's kind of like a more, if you were to count our first iteration of Compass as like a baby, this is now more like the adolescent version that's kind of finally growing into its features a little bit more and like learning how to actually like use its body, I guess, if we were to continue with that metaphor. But yeah, it's
a good metaphor.
Yeah,
I really like it.
It's like the adolescent version of the company where we're like, okay, we kind of have some processes and we know what we're doing a little bit. There's still like room to grow, but like it's a lot more stable and secure than what it was when we first started.
Beautiful. And how many products do you have now?
So we have the one product, but it's divided into, I think, 3 or 4. 3.5. Yeah, we've got one that's in development at the moment. So we've got 3.5. They all do slightly different things. So one of them is more like speed and volume counting. One of them is checking for like instances of hard braking and hard steering and G-forces. One of them is a map that shows the aggregate places where people are accelerating and de-accelerating on a road network like this intersection.
And does that show you, I guess, near misses or instances?
So a bit of both. So the SafePoint platform, which shows the steering and the braking, that shows near misses, which is indications of people having to like violently move the vehicle out of the way of something or to avoid something, and whether it be another vehicle or pedestrian, or they've just not paid attention and it's the lights have changed colour. And then we've got the one which is the heat map that just shows you, are people accelerating when they should be or braking when they should be based on the traffic context. And then we've got our newest one, which is in beta, which is PavePoint, and that one's talking about road quality or the ridership of that road. So when a driver is driving over a road, we're looking at the roll, pitch and the yaw of the vehicle, and it's basically giving you real-time updates all the time of what might that driver be experiencing. Are there any like severe dips in their vehicle, and why is that happening? Is it because like they've just gone and changed angle going down a hill, or is it maybe something more that we should be concerned about, like a pothole or something that they've tried to avoid on the road, and yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And so what do the next few years look like for you? What's on the horizon?
It's a great question. Busy, I hope, at least. So we've got PavePoint. We're hoping to get that out of beta and push it live, which should be. There's also a couple of other projects that I'm really excited about, but I'm not actually allowed to talk about them. But they're there in the background working. Yes. And then we are eventually looking to expand overseas, so potentially into Europe. We'll have to kind of see what happens. But yeah, eventually we'll move out of, Australia.
And yeah, it's so exciting for you guys. So Emily, we've only got a couple of minutes to go. You've got a lot to be proud of, but to finish up, what do you look like today as a person? So not as Compass IoT that you know from Emily back in the day. And like, what has this journey given you as an entrepreneur?
I think I was very like risk averse when I first started Compass, and I think being in a position where you have to make a decision, regardless of whether that decision is right or wrong, like nobody knows which one is correct. So we've got a mentor called Brad, and he always recommends, like, if you don't know what to do, just do something. And I think that having backing myself enough to be like, okay, I actually don't know what decision is correct, but I'm going to make one anyway. And it's nice knowing that regardless of what decision I make, or regardless of what decision Angus, my co-founder, makes, we will back each other on that decision, regardless of whether we think it might not have been the exact correct one, because there's that underlying trust that we think each other had made the best decision at the time with the information that we knew. I think that's super important, that backing yourself, which I'm a lot better at, but took a lot of practice. And I think being a little bit less risk averse, and it's like, what really is the worst thing that could possibly go wrong? Yeah.
Alrighty, and to wrap us up, is there anything at the moment that you need for the company? And if so, how can anyone here help you guys out? With what you're working on?
So any connections into like local councils or any transport organisations, whether that be government or like consultancies or insurance agencies as well. And I think if people were to reach out to us, it would be, you can either do it through LinkedIn, through the company LinkedIn, or through my LinkedIn, or through probably my email address, which is just emily@compassiot.com.au.
Beautiful. Thanks.